Did you know that the fertilizers, substrates and amendments which you use to grow plants can potentially contaminate your crops and render them unsafe for consumption? Let's take a look together now at heavy metals, what they are, why they are a concern, and some of the things that you can do to avoid introducing excessive levels of heavy metals into your garden.
So what are heavy metals? Heavy metals is a term which is applied to metallic and metalloid elements which exceed a specific weight per density, that is grams per centimetre cubed. Now the exact number of different heavy metals isn't agreed upon by the scientific community. However, the heavy metals of health concern all have a similar quality of becoming toxic to both mammal and plant life once they exceed a critical threshold in concentration. Common examples of heavy metals that you might have heard of actually include some nutrients that are essential to mammal and plant functioning, like iron, copper and zinc, as well as some heavy metals that you might have heard of in more industrial settings, such as lead, mercury, cadmium or arsenic.
So you might be thinking to yourself, whereabouts do these heavy metals come from? Heavy metals are naturally present throughout the globe in the rocks which become soils through the processes of weathering and natural erosion. Human industrial activity produces waste products which tend to concentrate these heavy metals, and unfortunately these waste products can contaminate our environment. Broadly speaking, there are three main routes of exposure to heavy metals, the first of which being the direct exposure route. So if you were actually engaged in, say, mining or some sort of process which involved direct contact with these parent materials. The second way through which you might be exposed is from the runoff of some of these industrial waste products actually contaminating the waterways and the soils around us, as well as even dusts that are blown out of these industrial sites can contain high levels of heavy metals, and they might then be blown over into neighbouring residential areas. The third method of exposure is the direct ingestion method. And so what this typically involves is the production of crops in areas that are unfortunately contaminated with heavy metal wastes, and these plants will actually uptake the heavy metals and store them in their leaves and shoots. Heavy metal uptake itself does vary dramatically from crop type and species, and that brings us to the next point that I'd like to talk about, which is the metal hyperaccumulators. Certain species of plants are known for their ability to grow in an environment with high concentrations of heavy metals without any observed phytotoxicity or other negative impacts to their growth. These types of plants are termed heavy metal hyperaccumulators. So metal accumulating plants scavenge metallic ions from their soil or other substrate at an increased rate compared to non-accumulating plants, and they store these extracted metals within their leaves, shoots and roots. And the concentration of metals within these parts can be anywhere from 50 to 100 times higher than non-accumulating plant species. Common plant species which are termed heavy metal hyperaccumulators includes the brassica family. So this is broccoli, cauliflower, mustards, Brussels sprouts, kale, lots of our important food crops, and also things like leafy greens like lettuce and spinach, and also important textile plants like hemp. So why is this all of a problem anyway? Well, as I mentioned earlier, heavy metals are toxic to mammals and fish, and they can accumulate in the human body, which potentially leads to adverse health outcomes. Heavy metals actually attach to the cells in your body and prevent them from functioning correctly. So a good example of this is our body cells frequently will use iron as a cofactor for enzymes and to drive enzymatic biological processes. And some heavy metals will preferentially replace the iron in that process, and that prevents the cells from actually performing their duties properly. So damage to the body which is caused by heavy metal exposure can include damage to your brain, liver and kidneys, and in some cases, particular with children and younger people, even death. So children are at an increased risk for heavy metal toxicity due to the smaller amount that's required to cause poisoning relative to their overall body mass. So the best way that you can avoid introducing any additional heavy metals into your home garden is to request certificates of analysis for the products that you use from their manufacturers. So for example, certificates of analysis should be available for any fertilizer products you're using, any soils and substrates, as well as amendments. Another thing to watch out for can be heavy metals that are in places that maybe you didn't think of, such as fabric pots, where I've seen tests that show very high levels of lead in some of the cheaper fabric pots. So I would urge you to get out there, do your research, and request these certificates of analysis from the manufacturers of the products that you're using in your garden.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.